One day, one of the biggest ships in the world disappeared in the middle of the sea without leaving any sign. Although a lot of specialists went looking for it for several years, no one was able to find it. Today, we will discover the story of the most famous ship in the world. It's called the Titanic. In the early 1900s, is a man named Joseph Bruce Ismay had a thought in his mind. He wanted to build a ship, but not just any ship. He wanted to build something the world had never seen before. So in 1907, he met Lord William James Peary, the head of Harland and Wolff, one of the most powerful shipbuilding companies in the world. And they sat in a room and started discussing the idea, which Lord William agreed to, and they began working on it. So in 1908, they came up with a design and the construction officially started. But this wasn't a job for a team. This was a job for an army. So they gathered more than 15,000 workers, engineers, welders, riveters, all ready to build something huge. And for the next 2 years, the noise never stopped. Steel slammed, rivets flew until finally the Titanic came into existence. The moment it docked in Southampton, the world went crazy. People literally flooded the port. Some watched from windows. Others just stood and stared in shock. On April 10, 1912, passengers began to board. And from the first step, it didn't feel like a ship. It felt like a hotel on water. Carpets so clean, staircases made of carved oak and shining gold, chandeliers hanging like stars above your head, and the people? First class passengers walked in dressed like royalty. Third class families, full of hope, squeezed in tight cabins with hearts full of dreams. It was a new beginning for hundreds of people. The engines roared, the ropes were pulled, the Titanic began to move. April 14th, 1912, halfway across the North Atlantic Ocean, around 375 miles south of Newfoundland, Canada. The sky was clear, there was no wind, no clouds, not even waves. The ship, at over 46,000 tons, moved so smoothly and calmly like it was weightless. Inside, the first-class dining room was winding down, the orchestra still playing. No one could sense any danger. But just after 11:40 p.m., something changed. The ship started shaking slightly. It felt normal, so people at the top didn't take it seriously. But deep down, the metal had already torn, and water began entering the ship. Although they designed it to be able to float with 4 compartments, the water already breached 5. So now it became a dangerous situation, but no one knew about it, not even the captain. But it didn't take long before he got the news. Then the crew members rushed to assess the damage. They realized the bow was slowly dipping, and there wasn't much time left, so they called for help, over and over. At first, no one answered, but suddenly a voice came from the other side. The RMS Carpathia was willing to help, but they were over 58 miles away, and it would take them nearly 4 hours to get there. But the Titanic wouldn't last that long. It had already begun to tilt. Some people put on life jackets. Some of them managed to reach the lifeboats. But it wasn't enough for everyone. There were approximately 2,224 people on board that night, but only 20 lifeboats existed, and the third-class passengers were stuck below because they didn't know where to go. And then the Titanic's lights flickered. Not yet destroyed, but its end had begun. When the Carpathia finally arrived at 4 a.m. the next morning, the sea was quiet, frozen, and empty. The exact location of the sinking remained a mystery. The crew had sent out coordinates during their final distress calls, but when rescue ships arrived, they found nothing other than a couple of bodies and lifeboats. At the time, the technology to explore the ocean floor didn't exist. There were no submarines that could reach that depth, no underwater cameras, no sonar. Over the years, search teams and ocean explorers launched dozens of missions, hoping for a better estimate of the coordinates, but nothing was found. Until 1985, a man named Dr. Robert Ballard, a former Navy officer and oceanographer, launched one last mission. This time, the approach was different. He didn't look for the ship itself. Instead, he followed the debris trail of small objects from the Titanic that had scattered and sunk slowly over miles. On September 1, 1985, at 1:05 a.m., a robotic camera scanning the ocean floor picked up a boiler, one of the Titanic's massive engines. Later, the Titanic had been finally found after disappearing for 73 years. But discovering the wreck was only half the story. The world still didn't know why the Titanic had sunk, how something so massive, so unsinkable, vanished beneath the waters on its very first voyage. In the early testimonies, many believed the Titanic sank intact. They were wrong. That was only proven decades later when Ballard's expedition sent back the first images of the split hull. The bow and stern lay 600 meters apart, shattered on the ocean floor. From there, the story began to form. On the night of April 14th, 1912, the Titanic had been traveling at nearly 22.5 knots, just below its maximum speed. Despite receiving at least 6 iceberg warnings throughout the day, Captain Edward J. Smith chose not to slow down. At 11:40 p.m., lookouts spotted an iceberg too late. There wasn't enough time to turn. The Titanic's starboard side scraped along the ice, opening up 6 of its 16 watertight compartments. The ship could stay afloat with 4 flooded compartments, but not 6. That's when the clock began ticking. Over the next 2.5 hours, water rushed in. Titanic broke apart and slipped beneath the sea. Of the 2,224 passengers and crew on board, only 710 survived and 1,514 lives were lost. Most died not from drowning, but from the cold. The water was below freezing. Death came in minutes. Later, it was discovered that the steel used in the Titanic's hull was brittle in cold temperatures, making it more vulnerable to cracking on impact. The rivets, the tiny metal pins holding the ship's plates together, were found to be weaker than they should have been. It wasn't just one mistake, it was many, a chain of decisions, flaws in design, flaws in judgment. The ship that was called unsinkable was in fact never prepared for disaster. In the years that followed, maritime laws changed. Lifeboat requirements were rewritten, but none of it changed what happened that night. The Titanic rests still beneath miles of ocean, to be a reminder that even the greatest creations can vanish in a single night. If you reached this point, I want to say to you, I'm glad you enjoyed this story. Just don't forget to subscribe to watch more videos like this.